Let me be honest with you about how absurd this whole thing actually was. I wasn't thinking about romance. I wasn't thinking about fate, or destiny, or whatever the moon goddess supposedly has planned for people like me. I was standing in the middle of Iron Vale Market Square, drenched to the bone, clutching a waterlogged ledger to my chest, and I was telling the Alpha King of the Crestfall Empire, to his face, that his tax officials had botched the borderland harvest calculations by 32%. That real families I actually knew, were going without food. Because someone in an office somewhere couldn't be bothered to fix a broken formula. He looked down at me from that enormous black horse with the expression of a man who had never in his entire life been addressed like that, and who genuinely could not decide whether he wanted to explode or do something else entirely. For about 4 minutes, he chose explode. Then he kissed me, and the whole world came apart at the seams. But I'm rushing ahead. Let's go back, not to the square, but to 3 weeks before it, to a records room buried in the lower wing of Crestfall Citadel, a room I had absolutely no business being in. My name is Sarah Voss. I'm 22. I serve as the official records keeper for the Borderland Settlement Coalition, and I carry with me one very specific flaw. I cannot walk past something broken and pretend I didn't see it. My mother pointed this out to me more times than I can count. So did my supervisor. So did the 2 guards who physically removed me from 3 different council sessions, each one a little less patient than the last. Something about wrongness just snags on me. The way a loose thread catches on your fingertips. You know better than to tug it. You tug it anyway. Here's the wrong thing that had caught on me 3 weeks earlier. The harvest tax assessments for the eastern borderlands were still being calculated using yield numbers from 4 years back, before the drought seasons had gutted actual production, which meant the settlements along the eastern ridge were being taxed at roughly 30% more than they could possibly afford. Nobody had done this out of cruelty. As far as I could tell, it was neglect. Somebody in the assessment office had never updated their formula, and nobody higher up had thought to double-check the math, but the consequences were real, and they were landing on real people. Families I'd grown up around, villages I could picture with my eyes closed, people selling their farming tools just to cover taxes on harvests that had never existed, outside of some clerk's outdated spreadsheet. I'd already submitted a formal correction request through the coalition 6 weeks prior. It traveled to the regional administrator, who bounced it up to the capital's assessment bureau, who sent back exactly one sentence, * the matter is under review, * which, in bureaucratic language, means * we've shoved your problem into a drawer and shut it, * so I opened the drawer myself. Getting into the lower records room, I had a legitimate coalition pass, and one very convenient piece of luck. The guard stationed at the 7th bell gate, a man named Aldis, was so devoted to his lunch that he waved through anyone holding a document at chest height without ever lifting his eyes. I spent frustrated hours in that room. I pulled everything I needed and built a fully corrected assessment using current yield figures, cross-checked against 3 independent sources. I copied it twice, went home, and filed a formal petition through every legitimate channel the coalition had access to. 3 more weeks crawled by. Nothing happened, which is exactly how I ended up standing in that market square for a Soak Tuesday, the day the Alpha King made his quarterly procession through the capital, a tradition meant to project closeness with the common people, though in practice it mostly meant watching him ride past on a black horse, cold and commanding, while everyone else scrambled out of his path. I didn't scramble. I want to be clear. I hadn't planned any of this. I only had the ledger on me, because I'd taken to carrying it everywhere at that point. The way you drag around something unfinished that won't let you set it down. I watched the procession approach. I watched the crowd part like water around a stone. And that same stubborn instinct that can't leave a wrong thing alone pushed me forward instead of back. His horse had no choice but to stop. The guard at his side already had a blade half drawn before I lifted the ledger high enough for him to see it and shouted, because the rain demanded it, that I had a corrected assessment of the eastern borderland harvest that had been sitting under so-called review for 9 weeks, and that I wanted 60 seconds, dead silence, rain hammering down, my own pulse thudding in my ears. The Alpha King studied me from atop his horse with an expression that could have frozen the entire square solid. He matched every rumor I'd ever heard, tall even seated, shoulders like a doorway, dark hair plastered flat by the rain, a jaw carved for command. His eyes were a deep amber gold, and in that grey light they burned with an intensity most people would call terrifying. I was terrified. I still didn't move. "You're standing in front of my horse," he said. His voice was low, controlled, deliberate. "Yes," I said. 60 seconds. That's all I want. There are formal channels for petitions. I've exhausted every one of them, I said. 9 weeks. It's called asterisk under review asterisk. And what that actually means is nothing is happening while people starve. Something flickered across his face. Not quite softening. More like a door cracking open a hair. "Move her aside," the guard said, hand still near his sword hilt. "Let her speak," the king said instead. So I spoke. Not 60 seconds. Closer to 4 minutes. I had every number memorized, every source cited in order. The rain never let up. The square stayed frozen. Dozens of people watching the way an audience watches, once it realizes the scene unfolding in front of them isn't staged. When I finished, he looked at me for a long stretch of silence. "Come to the administrative hall tomorrow. Second bell," he finally said. "Bring the ledger." Then he rode on, and I stood there in the downpour, hugging my soaked ledger, trying to remember how legs worked. I arrived 20 minutes early the next day. Not nerves, just habit. Punctuality is more or less the only social grace I've ever mastered, and I cling to it like a person with exactly one reliable tool. The administrative hall wasn't the grand ceremonial space you'd imagine from the outside. It was practical, busy, lined with long tables buried in paperwork and clerks weaving between them at a pace that suggested there was always more work than people. High ceilings, plain stone floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps, the air thick with ink and old paper, and the particular staleness of a room whose windows rarely opened. A young clerk guided me to a smaller side room, a table, a couple of chairs, a grey view of the inner courtyard, and a tea tray nobody had bothered to pour from yet. I set down my ledger, and waited. He came in 7 minutes past the second bell, alone, which caught me off guard. No guards, no council members, no advisors trailing him, just him, dressed for work rather than for spectacle. A dark, well-tailored jacket, understated and clearly expensive, but nothing ornate. Without the horse, without the procession, without the dramatic rain-lit entrance of the day before, he looked simply like a very large, very exhausted man who'd been up since well before dawn. He sat across from me, without any pleasantries, and nodded toward the ledger. "Walk me through it." So I did, page by page, the same methodical order I'd rehearsed in my head 100 times. The current yield figures against the outdated projections, the gap between them, the resulting overtaxation, how many settlements were affected, and how many people that actually meant. He didn't interrupt once. He didn't ask me to justify why I was even in that room. He simply read and listened, and his expression carried the look of someone doing real mental arithmetic, not performing polite attention. When I finished, he sat quiet for a moment. "How long has this taken you?" "Building the correction took 2 days, once I had access to the records," I said. "Getting the access took longer. You got into the administrative records room?" "Yes, through the oldest gap," he said. Not a question. I stared at him. "You know about that?" "We call it that internally," he said. He's manned that gate 11 years, and never once looked up from his lunch. Something twitched at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, just the shadow of one. "We keep in there on purpose. At this point, it filters for exactly the kind of person who won't let something go. You're using him as a screening test, a self-selecting one," he said. "Anyone determined enough to slip past him while he cared enough to find something worth caring about." He glanced back down at the ledger. "In your case, That's proven accurate. I sat with that for a second. The petition process is real. And genuinely overwhelmed. 9 weeks for a borderland correction is too long, he said. I won't pretend otherwise. He closed the ledger, met my eyes directly. Your name? Sarah Vorse. I keep records for the Borderland Settlement Coalition. Vorse, he repeated. Eastern Ridge family. My mother's people are from Hollows Creek. On the ridge. He nodded once, and something behind his eyes shifted. Not warmer exactly, but more present like whatever door had cracked open yesterday had swung a little further. The assessment will be corrected, he said. I'll have the Bureau recalculate using current data within the week. Whatever was overpaid gets credited toward next season for the affected settlements. I'd braced myself to argue for another 20 minutes at least. I had counter-arguments lined up, backup data ready to deploy. I stopped. Thank you, don't thank me, he said. This should have been caught internally. That it took a woman standing in front of my horse in the rain to fix it is a failure of our process, not a success, he stood. Apparently the meeting was over. The Bureau will contact your coalition directly with the timeline. He turned for the door. I gathered up my ledger. Can I ask you something? I said. He paused mid-stride. Didn't fully turn. Why did you stop? I asked. Yesterday. There were 20 people in that crowd who backed off. Most rulers would have just had the guard drag me out of the way. Why did you stop? A longer pause this time. Because you were holding that ledger, he said. Like it was the single most important thing in the square. He didn't look back. That usually means it is. And then he was gone. I stood there alone with my corrected ledger and cold, untouched tea, trying to process what had just happened. He'd fixed it instantly, cleanly, no bureaucratic delay. He'd known about the oldest gap. He'd remembered my name, hearing it exactly once. And he'd watched me stand in the rain holding a ledger and decided that was reason enough to stop. I walked out through the hall, past the clerks and the ink smell and the worn stone, back into the pale morning light. The wrong thing had been made right. I should have felt done. I didn't feel done. The correction timeline arrived at the coalition office 4 days later, precise, thorough, and faster than anything I'd seen move through official channels in 3 years of working there. Every settlement's recalculated figures were spelled out clearly, the credit process laid out step by step, exactly what I'd asked for, delivered with almost unsettling efficiency. My supervisor, a broad-shouldered woman named Hetta, who'd run the coalition for 15 years, and carried the particular tiredness of someone who's fought the same fights over and over. Read the document twice before looking up at me. How? She said. Not really a question. I stood in front of his horse, I said. She stared at me. You stood in front of the Alpha King's horse during the quarterly procession. Another pause. The formal channels weren't working. Hetta. And the oldest gap. I know about the oldest gap, she said, in the tone of someone who had definitely used it herself once or twice. She looked back down at the document. This is solid work. The settlements will feel this before winter hits. I nodded. That was the only part that actually mattered. Hollows Creek and the 11 other ridge settlements. Real people who'd sold real tools to cover taxes on harvests the numbers had never accounted for. Before winter. That was soon enough to matter. I went back to my desk and tried, again, to feel finished. 3 days passed. On the 4th, a note arrived at the coalition office, addressed to me specifically, written on heavy Citadel stationery with a small embossed crest pressed into the corner. Asterisk, there is a second discrepancy in the winter road maintenance budget for the northern settlements. I suspect you'll have opinions on it. Asterisk, that was it. Signed with a single letter. Asterisk C. Asterisk, I read it twice, then a third time. Then I set it down and stared at it for a solid 4 minutes. Had he found another problem? Or had he gone looking for one? Those were two very different possibilities, and I couldn't tell which this was. A fourth reading didn't clarify anything either. I wrote back that I'd need to review the actual allocation records before I could assess anything, and that if access could be arranged through proper channels, I'd have a review ready within the week. Access was arranged by the following morning. This time the gate guard already had my name on a list. No all-disk gap required. I spent 6 hours combing through the road maintenance files, and he was right. There was a second problem. Not negligence this time, but a structural flaw. Northern borderland routes were funded out of a discretionary line item. The first thing cut whenever the central budget tightened. Instead of the essential infrastructure line where they belonged, those northern roads were the only winter access for 11 settlements. Let them degrade. And those communities got cut off from supply lines for months at a stretch. I built the argument for reclassifying the budget line, cross-referenced it properly, made 2 copies, and then sat there in the records room for a moment, genuinely struggling to process the fact that the Alpha King of the Crestfall Empire had personally spotted an infrastructure flaw and sent a handwritten note about it to a coalition clerk he'd met exactly once, in the pouring rain. I couldn't make that fit into anything ordinary, no matter how I turned it over. I sent the corrected document back through the now established channel. Cover note attached explaining the fix and its downstream effects. His reply came the next morning. Asterisk, this one's more complicated than the harvest matter. I think it needs a real conversation. Thursday, second bell. Asterisk asterisk C. Asterisk I wrote back one word. Asterisk yes asterisk. And showed up Thursday to the same small side room. Same table. Same grey view of the courtyard. This time, somebody had actually poured the tea. He arrived and sat across from me, and we spent 90 minutes discussing road maintenance budget categories, objectively one of the most boring ways people could spend an hour and a half. And if you described that meeting to me a month earlier, I'd have agreed completely. But his questions were sharp. He pushed back on 2 of my assumptions in ways that forced me to think harder. Not because he was being difficult, but because he had context about central budget pressures I simply didn't have, and it genuinely complicated the picture. I revised parts of my argument on the spot. He noticed, and said nothing about it except a single nod, which I was starting to understand was his version of applause. By the end, he confirmed the budget category would shift in the next cycle, moving the northern roads permanently onto the essential infrastructure line. That's the right call, I said. He studied me a moment. You revised your position twice in this meeting. I had information you didn't. Most people don't revise, he said. They just defend the original stance, no matter what. It's inefficient. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth again. That almost smile. Yes, he said. It is. I went home, made dinner, sat at my own table, and thought about the way he'd said asterisk yes. It is asterisk. Like asterisk efficient asterisk was a word he muttered to himself constantly, and had never once expected to hear echoed back. Thursdays became a fixture on my calendar. I told myself it was purely about the work. By the 6th one, I'd stopped bothering to lie to myself about that. It wasn't a comfortable thing to admit. I sat with it for an entire evening, poking at it the way you poke at something you're not sure is safe to touch, and eventually landed on an honest inventory of the situation. I looked forward to Thursdays more than any other day of the week. I thought about our conversations in the hours between them. Whenever I found something interesting buried in a document, my first instinct was to tell him. Before I remembered, I had to wait until Thursday to do it. I'd started keeping a running list on the back page of my ledger. Things I wanted to mention. By every single Wednesday evening. That list had 7 items on it. Those were not the habits of someone thinking exclusively about borderland infrastructure. The problem, of course, was that he was the Alpha King of the Crestfall Empire, and I was a coalition clerk who'd originally broken into the Citadel because a guard was distracted by his sandwich. The notion that this was anything other than professional was so wildly implausible that I couldn't even take it seriously without feeling a little ridiculous. So I kept it tucked quietly in the back of my mind, kept showing up on Thursdays, kept doing the work, and kept adding to the list. The 7th Thursday was different. He was already in the room when I arrived. Hadn't happened before. Standing at the window with the look of a man working through something difficult that hadn't resolved itself yet. He turned when I came in, "There's something I need your read on," he said. "It isn't infrastructure." I set my ledger down. "All right, 3 settlements in the northern cluster have been petitioning the council for full pack integration," he sat. I sat. "The current charter grants the eastern settlements full status. The northern cluster was folded in later, under a different administrative process, and their status has stayed classified as provisional, which means reduced council representation and an extra review layer standing between them and every grievance they raise." I already knew this. It was one of the oldest entries on the coalition's advocacy list. 11 years provisional, I said. "Yes," he looked down at the table. "The council keeps deferring full status on the grounds that re-evaluation requires a formal process, and the formal process needs resources that always get allocated elsewhere first. The drawer," I said. He looked up. "Under review," I said. "Means it's in the drawer." Something shifted in his expression, more serious than the almost smile this time. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly what it means." A pause. "I want to move this. 11 years of stable settlements, consistent tax compliance, real community integration. The provisional label doesn't hold up on merit anymore." He looked at me directly. "I need someone to build the case for full reclassification. One that gets ahead of the council's usual deferral tactics. Someone who understands the process from the inside." I stared at him. "You want me to build the argument?" "I want *U* to build the argument." He confirmed. This was a different scale entirely from tax corrections or budget line items. A full reclassification of northern settlement status meant council approval, public documentation, possibly a charter amendment. The coalition had been chipping away at this 4 years, through standard channels, with nothing to show for it. "This is going to take more than a Thursday," I said. "I know. I'll need full access, not just the administrative wing. The charter archives too. And I'll need to be able to reach you directly when something needs clarifying, not just on the schedule." He was quiet a beat. "That can be arranged." I studied him across the table, the grey courtyard light spilling in between us, the tea going cold again, because neither of us ever remembered it existed, and a list of 7 unspoken things sitting on the back page of my ledger. "Why me?" I asked. "The coalition has senior advocates who've worked northern integration 4 years. They know the council chamber. They know the politics better than I do." He was quiet longer this time. "Because they've spent years working it through the standard channels," he said finally. "And the standard channels produced 11 more years of provisional status." His eyes held steady on mine. "You stood in front of my horse in the rain with a ledger full of correct numbers, and you didn't move until someone actually listened. That's the exact quality this problem needs." "That exact quality got me thrown out of 3 council meetings," I said. "I know," he said. "I'll read your file." I stared at him. "You * read my file, * after the market square," he said. "Yes. There's a file. Everyone who's used the oldest gap has one. Standard practice." I sat back slightly. He'd read my file after that first encounter, then sent me a note about a road budget, then arranged Thursdays, and now he was handing me the single biggest advocacy case the coalition had been unable to crack in over a decade. The list on the back of my ledger suddenly felt very small by comparison. "All right," I said. "I'll build it." He nodded. And then, because of course he did, picked up his long cold tea and drank it anyway, without a single flicker of reaction, and moved straight into logistics. I picked up my pen and started writing. The charter archives sat on the 4th floor of the Citadel's East Tower, a space nobody used with any regularity. You could tell from the dust on the upper shelves and the sheer astonishment on the archivist's face the first morning I climbed those stairs. His name was Pell, and he looked at me like he'd forgotten anyone came up there for anything besides a single document retrieval. I asked for the complete Northern Settlement Incorporation records, start to finish. He brought me 8 boxes. I spent the first 3 days doing nothing but reading, not drawing conclusions yet, just absorbing. It was the method my father had taught me for reading a landscape. Take in the whole shape before you decide what any of it means. The original provisional classification from 11 years back, every subsequent re-evaluation request, every council response, every justification for deferral, and a pattern that only became visible once you read them all together instead of one at a time. The pattern was this: the council never once rejected a re-evaluation on its actual merits. They deferred, every time, on procedural grounds. There was always some reason the timing was wrong: a budget cycle, a pending charter review, a committee reshuffle. Each individual deferral looked perfectly reasonable in isolation, stack 11 of them on top of each other, and nothing had moved in over a decade. That was useful, actually. It meant the case I needed to build wasn't about merit. Merit wasn't in dispute. It was about exposing the process itself as the actual obstacle. A sharper, more interesting argument. On the fourth day, he showed up at the archive, not at the second bell, mid-morning, unannounced. He climbed the stairs and found me at the long table, surrounded by 3 open boxes, sorted by date and category. A working draft in the center of it, all covered in notes, in 3 different colors of ink. Because I'd run out of my regular pen on day 2 and Pell had handed me whatever he had lying around, he looked at the table, then at the ink. The blue is the original record, I said before he could ask. Red is the deferral justifications. Green is what I'm building. He pulled out the chair across from me. Show me where you are. I walked him through it. He read without a single interruption, then asked 2 questions, both precise, both pointing at the exact spots I hadn't fully worked out yet, which told me he'd been chewing on the same problem from his own angle and had run into the same walls. The deferral chain, he said. That's your argument. Yes, I said. Not that the provisional status is wrong on its merits. The council already knows that much. The argument is that 11 straight process deferrals amount to a permanent denial in everything but name, which violates the Charter's implicit promise of a real re-evaluation. You need precedent, he said. A case where stacked deferrals were treated as equivalent to outright denial. I know. I'm looking. I gestured toward box 6, still unopened. Pell thinks there might be something in the pre-consolidation records, 30 years back. He reached over and opened it himself. Started searching. We spent 4 hours in that archive that morning. He found it. A minor territorial re-evaluation case from 29 years back, where a council tribunal had ruled that 6 consecutive procedural deferrals constituted a constructive denial. Not a perfect match, but close enough to build on. And in legal argument, one workable precedent beats 20 ideal ones that don't exist. I wrote it straight into the green notes. That's it, I said. That's it, he agreed. I looked up. He was already watching me. And for a moment neither of us said a word. The archive sat quiet around us, just the whisper of old paper, the faint hum of the citadel below, and his dark gold eyes doing something I'd been very carefully letting myself notice for weeks. I looked back down at the notes. I'll need 2 more weeks to write the full formal document. Take what you need, he said. He left in the mid-afternoon, back to whatever a king spends the rest of his day doing. I stayed until Pell started the quiet shuffling that meant closing time. Walking back through the citadel corridors, I passed a window overlooking the market square. Grey afternoon light, a couple of vendors still packing up, ordinary life going on as usual. The exact spot where I'd stood in front of his horse wasn't marked at all, just stone, indistinguishable from any other stone. I thought about him reading my file after that first encounter, about the note that just said *C. about the way he'd opened that box himself without waiting to be asked, about Thursdays, and the list on the back of my ledger, about that morning in the archive, 4 hours that had felt like 40 minutes. And I thought of something my mother had said to me once. In that way mothers deliver truths, completely unannounced, when you're least ready to hear them. Your problem is you only notice things when they're broken. The things that are right, you walk straight past. I stopped in the corridor for a second, then kept walking. But I was thinking about it the whole way. The formal document took 11 days, not 2 weeks. I was motivated. I sent it through the established channel on a Thursday morning, which meant I arrived at our usual meeting with nothing specific left to discuss. For the first time since we'd started, I sat down across from him. "I sent the document this morning. You should have it." He looked at the space between us. No ledgers, no boxes, no colored ink. "So," he said. "So," I said. A pause. The courtyard was doing something interesting with the light that morning. Low autumn sun slanting in, making the grey stone look almost warm. "There's no current infrastructure problem needing your input," he said. "No, the integration document is complete." "Yes, which means," he said, with the careful precision of a man navigating something delicate, "there's no form or reason for this meeting." I looked at him directly. "Is that what you want? For the meetings to stop?" A longer pause, one with real weight behind it. "No," he said. "Something happened in my chest that I wasn't going to examine in real time." "Then we could just talk," I said, "without a problem to fix." He looked, for the first time since I'd known him, genuinely uncertain, an expression that clearly didn't belong on his face. "It was just visiting." "I'm not sure I know how to do that," he admitted. "Talk without an agenda." "I don't believe you," I said. "You talked to me for 4 hours in that archive on Tuesday. Maybe 40 minutes of that was about the precedent case. The rest of it was you telling me about the consolidation era, and why the old pre-consolidation charter structure actually made more legal sense than what replaced it. And I told you what borderland winters really look like, versus how the administrative reports describe them. None of that was about the precedent." He went quiet. "That was talking without an agenda," I said. "You did fine." Something settled in his face, the uncertainty receding, something steadier taking its place. "Hollows Creek," he said. "You said your mother's people are from there. What's it like?" I actually thought about it properly. "The way you think about somewhere you haven't set foot in for 3 years." "Small," I said. "The ridge sits higher than the maps make it look. In winter, mist rolls in from the eastern poles in the valley below the village for weeks. You look out some mornings, and it seems like the whole place is floating above the clouds." I paused. "My grandmother had a house right at the edge of it. You could sit on her back step and watch the mist move. It looked like breathing." He was listening with that same total attention I'd noticed before. Like what I was saying mattered enough to hear all the way through. "I've never been to the Eastern Ridge," he said. "The reports don't do it justice. The reports don't do most things justice," I said. "They're accurate about quantities," he said, "not about what things actually feel like." "Is that a problem for you? You think about that gap constantly," I said, "between what the records say and what things actually are." "It's one of the more persistent frustrations of ruling from behind a desk," he said. "Everything that reaches me has already passed through someone else's hands, someone else's assumptions. By the time it lands on my table, it's accurate on the numbers and completely silent on everything else." "That's why you stopped for the ledger," I said. "In the square." He looked at me. "You said I was holding it like it was the most important thing there," I said. "But that's not the real reason you stopped. You stopped because something unfiltered came straight at you, and you didn't want to wave it past." A long silence. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's more accurate. We talked for 2 hours that morning. Not about infrastructure, not about charters or budget lines, but about the gap between records and reality, about growing up on the ridge, about a pre-consolidation governance structure he genuinely admired from a design standpoint, about why my mother thought my inability to let things go was a liability, and why I was starting to doubt she was right. That last part slipped out without my meaning it to. It landed on the table between us, and he considered it seriously. "I don't think she's right," he said. "You're biased," I said. "You benefit from it directly. I'm also in a position to compare you against a large number of people who leave things alone," he said. "The comparison tells me plenty." I looked down at my hands. "Can I ask you something?" "You always ask that right before you ask anyway," he said, almost dry. "That almost thing again. When you sent the note," I said, "about the road budget, was there really a discrepancy? Or were you?" I stopped, unsure how to finish without naming something neither of us had said out loud yet. He was quiet for a moment. There was a real discrepancy, he said. It needed fixing. A pause. It was also, he said carefully, an excuse to reach out through a framework that made sense, instead of one that was harder to explain. Harder to explain how? Yes, he said. We looked at each other across the table until his aide knocked with an afternoon council matter, and the moment folded itself neatly away, and we went back to being what we were supposed to be, but it didn't vanish. It just waited. The Northern Integration document reached the council on a Monday. By Wednesday, they'd responded with a request for supplementary material addressing 3 procedural points, which Hetta brought to my desk wearing an expression recognized as her version of impressed, essentially identical to her usual expression except one eyebrow sat a fraction higher than normal. They're actually engaging with it, she said, not kicking it to committee. That precedent case makes deferral a lot harder to justify. I found the precedent in the 30-year-old pre-consolidation records, I said. Pearl was helpful, I added. Hetta studied me for a long moment. Sarah, how much time have you spent in the Citadel archives these past 3 weeks? Some, I said. And in direct meetings with the Alpha King. I straightened the papers on my desk. The Thursday meetings have been productive for the coalition's advocacy work. That's not what I asked. I looked up. She was watching me with 15 years of trained instinct, and she had clearly already read this particular situation correctly. It's professional, I said. I didn't say it wasn't, she said pleasantly, and walked back into her office. I sat there a moment. Then I picked up the council's supplementary questions and got to work. Those 3 points were substantive, real work, not just clarification. I spent Thursday morning back in the archives and showed up to our meeting with notes instead of a finished draft, which meant we worked through the questions together, which had, without either of us deciding it, become the standard shape of our Thursdays. He caught a flaw in my second point that I'd missed. This clause, he said, pointing at the charter language, substantial community integration is never actually defined in the charter itself. The council will exploit that gap to reopen the Marek question, even though the precedent forecloses the process question. I reread it. He was right. I need to define it before they get the chance. Put your definition in the supplement, he said. Back it with evidence. Settlement stability, tax compliance, infrastructure, cross-settlement cooperation data. Build the definition out of the record itself, so there's no room for a different reading. I was already writing. He watched me for a moment. You write without looking at the page. What? Your eyes stay on the source. Your hand just moves on its own. I looked down. He was right. I hadn't been watching my own hand at all. My father's habit, I said. He was a surveyor. He mapped the ridge roads. Used to say, if you watch your own pen, you end up writing what you think you saw instead of what was actually there. He went quiet for a moment. Your father mapped the northern ridge roads. Some of them, I said. The ones caught up in the maintenance budget problem. He did the original survey. Something crossed his face. The roads your father mapped are the ones that degraded, because they'd been sitting in the discretionary fund. Yes, I hadn't said that connection out loud before. Even though I'd been carrying it silently, he looked down at the notes between us. I'm sorry, he said. He stopped there, not a man who reaches 4 words easily, and clearly hunting now for something adequate, finding only a gap where it should have been. It's all right, I said. He died before the damage really showed. He never saw the roads fail. I paused, but he would have taken it personally. He was meticulous about those surveys. He should have taken it personally, he said. It was his work. Yes, I said. We sat with that in silence. The archive was quiet around us, that old paper smell, low autumn light through the window. Tell me about him, he said. Not a formal request, just simple, direct. So I told him about a surveyor who came home with mud caked on his boots and maps crammed with tiny precise notations, who'd taught me to read a landscape exactly the way he read a document, take in the whole shape first, draw no conclusions until you had, who used to say the most dangerous thing anyone could do was mistake the map for the actual ground, who died 3 springs ago and left me his surveying kit, and his habit of never watching his own pen. He listened all the way through, the way he always did. He sounds like someone who understood what things actually were, he said when I finished. Yes, I said. He did. That's rarer than it should be. Yes, I said again. We looked at each other across the notes and the autumn light, and the quiet archive, and whatever he'd carefully named 2 weeks earlier, and neither of us had brought up since, sat right there in the room with us, harder and harder to file away as background noise. I picked up my pen. I should finish the supplement. Yes, he said. He didn't move right away. Then he did. We worked another hour. The supplement took shape. The argument tightened. By the time Pell started closing up downstairs, the second and third points were resolved. I finished the first, the undefined phrase. That evening, alone at my own table, in the handwriting that never looks at the page, I thought about my father's roads, about Thursdays, about the excuse he'd named carefully, and the fact that I hadn't pushed, and that neither of us had walked away. The council approved a northern integration reclassification on a grey November morning. Heta found me in the archives, midway through an unrelated project, and stood in the doorway. It passed. Full integration. Effective the 1st of next month. I set down whatever I'd been holding. All 11 settlements. All 11, she said. Unanimous. That hasn't happened in that chamber in 4 years. I sat with that for a moment. Hollows Creek and the 10 other ridge settlements. 11 years of provisional status, of reduced representation, of an extra review layer sitting on top of every grievance. Done. Finished. Out of the drawer for good. My eyes stung. I pressed my fingers against them. Go home, Heta said. Not unkindly. You've lived in this archive for 3 weeks. Go home and sleep. I went home. I didn't sleep. I sat at my table and thought about my grandmother's house on the ridge, and the mist that looked like breathing, and my father's maps rolled up in the corner of my room, and 11 years, and 1 ledger in the rain, and Thursdays, and a man who read files because he wanted to know a name. I wrote him a note. Asterisk, the council approved full integration this morning. Unanimous. Thank you for the precedent. S asterisk, his reply came that evening. Asterisk, the precedent was sitting in your box 6 the whole time. You would have found it. I just lifted the lid. Come Thursday. See asterisk, I read it 3 times. Asterisk, you would have found it. I just lifted the lid. Asterisk, Thursday was 4 days out. 4 days felt unreasonably long. That, itself, was a problem, and I recognized it clearly. The same way I'd recognized the Thursday thing weeks earlier, and the list on the back of my ledger, and the possibility that my mother might be wrong about me. I was very good at recognizing things, considerably worse at knowing what to do once I had. Here's what I knew. He was the Alpha King of the Crestfall Empire. I was a coalition records keeper. The professional scaffolding that had given us our Thursdays wouldn't exist anymore once the integration case wrapped up, and it had. The formal document was done. The supplement was answered. The council had voted. The professional excuse for Thursdays was gone. Whatever Thursday was now, it was something else entirely, and I didn't know if he understood that, or if I should be the one to say it, or if saying it out loud would turn it into something too real to manage. I circled that thought roughly 40 times over the following 4 days, and then put my coat on and went to the Citadel anyway, because apparently I was constitutionally incapable of not going. He was already in the room, just like the 7th Thursday, standing at the window. He turned when I walked in. The formal work is finished, I said, before he could speak, because I'd decided on the walk over that I wasn't going to pretend this was still what it had been 3 months ago. I'm not built for pretending. It never goes well for me. Yes, he said. So this Thursday isn't about an infrastructure problem. No. And the next one won't be either. No, he said again. He was watching me with that focused attention of someone tracking an argument carefully, because the conclusion actually matters. I need to know what this is, I said. Because I stopped, started again. I have a list on the back of my working ledger. 7 items every Wednesday, without fail. Things I want to tell you. I've been keeping it for 2 months, and I haven't told a single person about it, because I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't want to name it wrong. I looked at him directly. What is this? A long silence. Then he crossed the room, not fast, but deliberate, and stopped close enough that I had to tilt my head to hold his gaze. His dark gold eyes were doing the thing I'd spent months carefully not examining. This time I looked straight at it. I read your file after the market square, he said, because I wanted your name. Not for administrative reasons. A pause. The road maintenance discrepancy was real. The note was also an excuse. I've known both those things were true. At the same time, since the day I sent it, I held his gaze. You could have just said that. You could have asked. I'm asking now, I said. He looked at me a moment. You're also still arguing, he said. You've been arguing since the second you walked in. I'm not arguing, I said. I'm being precise about the nature of Thursdays. About the nature of, yes, about Thursdays. About the list. About what this? He kissed me. Not roughly. Not carelessly. With the full, decisive certainty of a man who'd already made his choice and had no interest in deliberating a second longer. His hand came up to my jaw, and my sentence just stopped mid-word. And then the whole world cracked open. That's genuinely the only way I know how to describe it. And I don't mean it as a figure of speech. Something physical happened. Warmth bloomed at my mouth and spread outward through my chest, down my arms, into my fingertips, in a wave unlike anything I'd ever felt. Bright, certain, enormous, like something that had been holding its breath had just been told yes. I pulled back. My hands had landed on his chest without my noticing. He was looking at me with an expression I'd never once seen on him. Something caught between shock, wonder, and absolute certainty, all at once. What was that? I said. I don't know, he said. His voice had gone quieter, but we both already knew exactly what it was. Neither of us moved for a moment. My hand stayed on his chest. His hand stayed at my jaw, not gripping, just resting, like he'd forgotten to take it away. The warmth that had rushed through me had settled into something quieter now, but it hadn't disappeared. It sat in my chest, like something that had always been there, just never switched on before. The mate bond, I said. Flat, just naming it. Yes, he said. Still in that quieter register. I stepped back, not away from him exactly, just needing the physical space to think, which required a bit more distance than we currently had between us. He let his hand fall. That wasn't, I started, planned, he said. No, I looked at him. He was watching me with a look I hadn't seen before. Certainty layered over something raw underneath, on a face that didn't usually allow either. You kissed me to end the argument, I said, and you didn't know that would happen. No, he said. I've never. He stopped, started over. The mate bond isn't universal. Not every alpha experiences one. I'd assumed. Another stop. I'd stopped assuming I would. I let that settle. You'd stopped expecting it. Yes, and now it's happened, he said. In the middle of a Thursday meeting. Because you were being precise about the nature of Thursdays, something shifted in his expression. That almost thing at the corner of his mouth. But under an entirely different weight than before. Yes, he said. That's an accurate account of events. I sat down, not from lightheadedness, but because I needed to think, and standing while doing it felt inadequate somehow. He stayed on his feet, watching, giving me room to process at my own pace. One of many things about him had been carefully not letting myself notice for 2 months. The mate bond. I understood it the way everyone in this world understands it, theoretically. A fundamental recognition between two wolves, spiritual and biological both, permanent, unbreakable, a connection the wolf nature identifies as its other half. I wasn't a wolf. I was human. A coalition clerk, a surveyor's daughter, someone who stood in front of horses in the rain holding correct ledgers. I'm human, I said. I know, he said. Can the bond even? Does it work across? Rarely, he said. But yes, it's documented. A human mate is uncommon, but not unheard of. A pause. You felt it too. It wasn't really a question. Yes, I said. I felt it. He sat down then, across from me, same table, same positions we'd held 4 months of Thursdays. The room looked exactly the same. The grey courtyard through the window looked exactly the same. Nothing in that room had changed, and nothing was the same. I need to think, I said. Of course, he said. Not because I wanted to be precise about it. My old habit. But precision needed the right words, and these ones felt enormous. Not because I don't feel it. I do. I felt it the instant it happened, and I feel it right now. And it isn't going away. I looked at him. But I'm someone who thinks before I act on big things. I need to think. Take what you need, he said. The exact words he'd used about the charter document. I looked down at my hands. You said you'd stopped expecting this. Yes. So when it happened, I tried to shape the question properly. Are you certain? Not about the bond. I know the bond is certain. Are you certain that you want this? Because it's enormous, and it started from an argument about Thursdays, and I need to know you're not just Sarah, he said. I stopped. I read your file because I wanted your name, he said. I invented an excuse to send you a note. I climbed those archive stairs on a Tuesday morning because I wanted to be in the same room as you. And I didn't have any formal reason to be. I'd been manufacturing formal reasons for 2 months. He held my gaze, steady. I'm certain. I studied him for a long moment. The list, I said. 7 things every Wednesday. This week's top item was something I found in the pre-consolidation records about how the original Ridge Road surveys were classified compared to how they're classified now, and why that discrepancy is warping the maintenance funding formula. He watched me. The second item, I said, wasn't about infrastructure. Something opened in his expression, the way a window opens when someone finally reaches for the latch and pushes. Tell me the second item, he said. I noticed, I said carefully, that when you find something interesting in a document, you make this small sound, barely anything, just a short exhale. And I noticed I'd started listening for it. Silence. That's the second item, he said finally. Yes. He was quiet a moment. I do the same thing, he said. I've noticed you make a small sound whenever you catch a flaw in your own argument before I do. A quiet hum, almost like you're annoyed at yourself. But pleased, too. I stared at him. You noticed that 2 months ago, he said. We looked at each other across the Thursday table, the mate bond sitting warm and steady in my chest like a held breath. I need to think, I said again. Quieter this time. I know, he said. I'll be here. I thought for 2 days, not anxiously, not looping the same ground the way I'd circled the Thursday question for 2 months without resolving anything. This was different, clearer. I sat with it, the way my father taught me to sit with new terrain before putting pen to map. Let the whole shape settle first. Here was the whole shape of it. The mate bond had happened. I'd felt it. It was real. And it wasn't going away. That part wasn't in question. The real question was what I wanted. Not what the bond wanted. Not what was politically expected. Not what made logical sense given how structurally improbable the entire situation was. What I, Sarah Vorse, records keeper, surveyor's daughter, chronic fixer of broken things, actually wanted. I went through it honestly. I wanted Thursdays. I'd wanted them for 2 months before I let myself admit it. I wanted the archive mornings, the cold tea. That specific quality of attention, he gave everything. The way he listened all the way through to the end. I wanted the almost dry thing at the corner of his mouth. I wanted the small exhale when he found something interesting. And the fact that he'd noticed my quiet hum 2 months ago and said nothing until now. I wanted the second item on the Wednesday list. I wanted, more than I'd wanted most things, to find out what it looked like when neither of us was hiding behind a professional framework or an invented pretext anymore. What it looked like with no more excuses required. I went back on the third day. Not a Thursday, a Wednesday. I asked for him through the proper channel and waited in the side room. And when he walked in and saw me sitting there a day early, his expression did the same thing it had done the first time I'd ever walked into a room. He was already in. Something that visited his face, but clearly didn't live there. Something close to relief. I hadn't planned exactly what I'd say. I'd decided planning it would produce something to tidy for what this actually was. I thought about it, I said. He sat. The mate bond didn't create what I feel, I said. I want that clear. What I feel has been building for 2 months, through cold tea and archive boxes and a note on cream paper that just said *C. I looked at him. The bond recognized something that already existed. It didn't build it. He went very still. I'm still a coalition records keeper, I said. I'm still the woman who stands in front of horses in the rain. That's not changing, and I need you to understand that before anything else. I'm not going to perform some different version of myself for this. I know that, he said. I'm also going to argue with you, I said, regularly, about things that matter, because I can't leave wrong things alone. And some of those wrong things are going to be decisions you've made. I know that too, and I need the coalition work to keep going, I said. The advocacy, not as a framework for something else, as its own real thing. Yes, he said. No conditions. I looked at him. You're being remarkably agreeable. I'm agreeing with things I actually agree with, he said. That's not always how agreement works, I said. No, he admitted. But these specific things, I agree with genuinely. A pause. I have a list too. I stared. You have a list, not on the back of a ledger, he said. I don't have your organizational instinct. More of a running account. In my head, what's on it? His eyes went briefly to the table, then back to me. The way you sorted the archive boxes by ink color when you ran out of pen, he said. The fact that you arrived 20 minutes early to every single Thursday for 3 months, and thought I hadn't noticed. The thing you said about your grandmother's house and the mist that looked like breathing. A pause. The fact that in 6 years of council sessions, I've never once heard anyone put it as plainly as *the drawer is a complete argument, *, and when you said it, I knew exactly what you meant. So did every single person in that room. I didn't say anything for a moment. That's the account, he said. Approximately. I looked at him for a long stretch. The grey courtyard through the window. The tea sitting untouched between us. Apparently Wednesdays were the same as Thursdays, just 1 day earlier, minus the pretending, the kiss, I said. You did it to end the argument. Yes. It didn't end the argument, I said. I was going to keep going. The kiss just interrupted it. I know, he said. You were saying something about the nature of Thursdays. I finished. Yes. You were right about Thursdays. You were right about Thursdays, he agreed. I'm usually right about things. I said. I know, he said. And this time the almost thing at the corner of his mouth finished the job and became a full, real smile. One I hadn't seen from him before in its entirety. It changed his whole face, made him look younger, made him look like a person instead of a title. The mate bond sat warm and settled in my chest. You should know, I said. Next Wednesday's top item, already about you, not infrastructure. What is it? I'll tell you next Wednesday, I said. He looked at me. That's deliberately withholding information. Yes, I said. I'm aware. The smile again, complete this time. Then I'll be here Wednesday, he said. Wednesday came, and I told him the top item. It was this. I'd noticed that when he was working through something genuinely difficult, something with no clean answer, he went quiet in a very specific way. Not the controlled quiet of a man managing his own expression, but a different quiet, the kind that meant he was truly inside the problem, not performing consideration of it. I'd learned to tell those two silences apart. The second one, the real one, was the one I trusted completely. He listened without a single interruption. Then he said, "That's the most exact description anyone's ever given of how my mind actually works. I've been paying attention," I said. "I know," he said. He searched for the word. "I find it," he paused, studying it. Then, finally, to be *seen. That specifically, I thought about what that must be like. Not the weight of the power, not the difficulty of ruling, but the specific loneliness of being the most visible person in every room, while somehow remaining the least seen. Everyone watching the title, nobody watching the man underneath it, who was occasionally uncertain, who had two different kinds of silence, who made a soft exhale whenever he found something interesting in a document. You should know, I said, that I see both the title and the person inside it. His expression went completely unguarded. I know, he said. That's exactly it, Sarah. That's the specific thing. The weeks after that Wednesday conversation felt different from the ones before it, not dramatically, since nothing in the visible, formal structure of our lives had changed yet. That required careful handling. The mate bond between an alpha king and the human coalition clerk was not a small political footnote, and we both understood that how it became public would ripple outward to affect the settlements and people the coalition actually served. He raised it directly the following Thursday. No more pretending about why we were meeting. We were meeting because we were meeting. The council needs to hear it from us, he said, before they hear it elsewhere. Yes, I said. And the coalition? I think Heta already suspects something. What did you tell her? That it was professional, I said, which was accurate at the time. And now it's also something else, I said. I'll tell her the truth. Heta's practical. She weigh what it means for the coalition's relationship with the Citadel, and decide whether it helps our advocacy work or complicates it. And if she decides it complicates it, I sat with that honestly, then she and I will have a hard conversation about how to handle it, I said. The coalition's independence matters. I'm not going to pretend this is simple, he nodded. I wouldn't want you to. I know, I said. That's on the list too. Heta took the news with the same calm of someone who'd mostly already worked it out and was just waiting for confirmation. She looked at me for a long moment after I finished. The northern integration, she said. The road reclassification. Those were genuine. Yes, the work was real. The problems were real. The solutions were real. And the Thursdays were genuine too, I said. And also something else. At the same time, she was quiet a beat. The coalition needs to keep its independence, she said. Our credibility with the borderland settlements depends on us not looking like an extension of the Citadel. I know, which means your role here stays your role, she said. Defined by the work, not by this, agreed. And if this ever conflicts with what the coalition's advocacy requires, I said, I'll tell you the moment I know, and I won't compromise the coalition's work for it. She looked at me a while longer. Then, do you know what your mother used to say about you? I blinked. You knew my mother. We grew up in neighboring villages, she said. Something I hadn't known in 3 years of working under her. She used to say you only noticed things when they were broken, that you walked right past the things that were right. She might have been partly correct, I said. She was completely wrong, Heta said. You notice everything. You're just selective about what you act on. She glanced back to her desk. The northern settlements get full integration next month. Your father's road surveys are becoming the new basis for the maintenance categorization going forward. My throat tightened. I think he'd have been satisfied with that, she said. Now go back to work. And tell the Alpha King the coalition expects the same standard of engagement on borderland matters that it's gotten these past 3 months. I'll tell him exactly that, I said. Exactly like that, she said. Not softened. I don't do things softened. I know, she said. It's your most useful trait. And your most exhausting one. She picked her pen back up. Close the door on your way out. I closed the door and stood in the hallway a moment, hands still on the handle, thinking about my mother, who'd grown up beside Heta's village, about my father, whose maps were about to become policy, about a grandmother's house where the mist looked like breathing. Everything connects to everything else. You just can't see it from inside any single moment. I went back to my desk, pulled out my ledger, and flipped to the back page. The Wednesday list already had 4 items on it. Number 1 wasn't about infrastructure. Spring arrived in Crestfall, the way it arrives in every capital city, slowly, and then all at once. The grey stone of the Citadel warmed by degrees until one morning you stepped outside and the light had shifted. The air had lost its bite, and the whole world had quietly reset itself. I noticed it on a Tuesday, walking through the market square toward the Citadel. The exact spot where I'd once stood in front of his horse was just stone now. the same as every other stone around it. No marker. Nothing visible from the outside to suggest anything had ever happened there. A woman was selling the first spring vegetables from a cart nearby. Two children tore between the stalls with the frantic energy of kids who'd spent the whole winter cooped up and had just been set loose. An entirely ordinary Tuesday morning, in an entirely ordinary square. I'd stood on this exact spot 7 months earlier, soaked through, refusing to move. That version of me hadn't known what she was starting. She'd known about tax discrepancies and misclassified surveys and a drawer that wouldn't open after 11 years. She hadn't known about Thursdays, or archive boxes color-coded in 3 inks, or a small exhale that meant something had just been found. She hadn't known the horse belonged to a man who read files because he wanted to know a person's name, not for administrative reasons. I kept walking. The public announcement had gone out 2 weeks earlier, handled with all the appropriate ceremony, council presence, formal documentation. The coalition had released its own statement, drafted with Hetter's usual precision, carefully underscoring the organization's independence, while acknowledging the professional relationship that had produced real, tangible results for the borderland settlements. It was a document that threaded several needles at once, and I'd read it 3 times with genuine admiration. The public reaction had been mixed, which I'd expected. I wasn't nobility, no political lineage, no pack name behind me. Just a surveyor's daughter from the coalition with metaphorical mud on her boots and a well-documented inability to let broken things stay broken. A handful of council members had raised objections, technically framed, but substantively about my background. I'd read every one of them carefully and concluded that the underlying anxieties were real, even if the framing was polite fiction, and that the right response to a real anxiety is to answer the substance, not dismiss the source. I drafted the response myself, not softened, just precise. He'd read it and said it was more effective than anything his own advisors had produced. That's because your advisors are writing for the council's comfort, I told him. I'm writing for their actual concerns. Those aren't the same thing. He'd made the small exhale. That morning we were in his study, other than the side room, a shift that had happened naturally somewhere in the past month, as the formal Thursday structure had dissolved into something looser and more ongoing. The study had maps on the walls, a north-facing window. A fire kept burning more for warmth than atmosphere, and it had slowly become, without either of us announcing it, a room that felt like both of ours. I'd brought the updated Borderland water access records, the coalition's current priority, and one that had already sparked to informal conversations that were starting to look like the next big structural fight. Right behind Northern Integration, he glanced up from the water documents when I walked in. There's something I want to show you. In the records. Not in the records, I said. I set the documents on his desk. Later. After this, we spent the morning working through the water access material. He caught to things I'd missed. Still irritating. And still, somehow, one of the items on the list. I caught one thing he'd missed, which he acknowledged without a hint of defensiveness. Not a small thing. In a man who'd spent years being the one person in every room, whose judgment nobody questioned. At midday, he had a council session. After, I said, the thing I want to show you. After, he agreed. The session apparently ran long, because it was late afternoon by the time we walked out through the Citadel's east gate and into the city. The first time we'd done that together outside of anything formal. A guard trailed at a distance, a compromise we'd negotiated, not at his elbow, just present. We walked through the golden late afternoon streets of Crestfall toward the market square. The vegetable cart woman was still there, packing up her last stock. The children from the morning had gone home. The square sat in low gold light, the stones still warm from the day's sun. I stopped in one particular spot. Here, I said. He looked at the ground, then at me. This is where I stood, I said. In the rain. 7 months ago. He looked down at the stone beneath us, then up in the direction his procession would have entered from. I saw you from over there, he said, orienting himself. You turned. He shifted slightly, right about here. Before everyone else stepped back. Yes, I said. We stood there together for a moment. If I'd looked away, he said, if the guard had pulled you aside, then the harvest assessment would still be wrong, I said. The road budget would still be sitting in the drawer, and the northern settlements would still be provisional. I paused, and I'd never have found out about the Aldis Gap, or the precedent case, or the exhale. He looked at me in the fading afternoon light of that ordinary square. Sarah, he said, double quotes, yes. Next time you argue with me, he said, I'm not going to kiss you to make it stop. No, I agreed. That backfired significantly, for both of us, he said. The smile, the real one, complete and unguarded. For both of us, I said. The mate bond sat warm in my chest, permanent, entirely certain. Spring light held on the square stones around us. We walked back through the market together, unhurried, through an ordinary Tuesday evening in an ordinary city where nothing looked any different from the outside, but where everything underneath had changed completely. I already had a new item for next Wednesday's list. It wasn't about infrastructure.